Enduro racing is kicking off at the moment. There's never been a better time for the sport. With more races going on, more bikes out there to choose from, it's a great time to be alive. But what if you're new to the sport? What if you're looking at getting into racing, or you've just got your new shred sled and you're not entirely sure how to set it up? The amount of information out there is mind-boggling. Well, fear not, everybody. I'll be drawing upon my Enduro experience to give you the ultimate guide to setting up your Enduro bike. We're going to skip a few of the very basics on this video, as it's not a buyer's guide. Hopefully you've already got your Enduro bike in the right size, and if not, well, we've done a ton of videos that can help you with that. We're going to focus on how to actually set that Enduro bike of yours up once you've got it. Enduro racing can require just as much up as it does down, so the right gearing on your bike is crucial. Now, 1x12 drivetrains are almost the norm nowadays, with a lot of manufacturers actually designing their bikes specifically around this without even having the space or the mounting to put a front mech on. Wide range cassettes here are the way forward. Something like a 50 or a 51 out back, all the way down to a 10 or 11 perhaps, is going to give you a big old range. Pair that with something like a 30 or to 32 tooth chainring on the front, and you can pretty much get yourself up or down anything. Now, if you want, you can go even smaller at the front. You could go a 28. I know people who run that. All the way up to a 36 if you feel you've got the legs to it, but just be careful, because a lot of frame manufacturers won't actually take a 36 tooth up front because it might foul here on the chainstay, but that can be, you can have a look at that afterwards. If you're thinking of going down the electronic route for your shifting, well, this can be a really good idea, as it can offer you some real solid, precise shifting, but there's a few things worth taking into consideration. Firstly, Enduro by its very nature is not smooth. The tracks are rough as anything, so if you bash it or break it, well, you're in for a hefty expense there to replace it. Also, when you're racing these big old courses, or you're going on big long rides, and I mean, you could be way over there, and you bust it, they can be very hard to fix and maintain trail side compared to a mechanical group set, which you can kind of bodge or make it run in a nice easy gear to at least get you home. So it's definitely something worth thinking about. Lastly, but not leastly, on the drivetrain front then is a little something up front, a bash guard and a chain device. Great for warding off any unwanted rocks from destroying your chain or chainring, and well, the chain device just stops any potential chance of that chain dropping off, even though it shouldn't, obviously, with these new narrow wide chainrings these days. But you know what, they weigh nothing, so really it's a no-brainer when it comes to setup, and I definitely recommend putting them on there. Big days in the saddle mean that comfort is key, so I'm going to be talking about your contact points now. Let's start with the saddle, because you're going to be putting a lot of time in on that. So if you've got a saddle that works for you, I'd strongly recommend sticking that thing straight on the bike, regardless of whether it's new or not. If you've found a saddle that's really comfy, then I would definitely stick with it, because you're going to be sitting on your butt a lot, so you want to be comfortable. Another great thing to do here is, if you have got a saddle that is really good for you and you like, buy a spare, because I've had it before, they've stopped making a certain saddle, I've gone back to get another one, I can't find it. It's out of stock, it's discontinued, stinker, I need to try and find a replacement. Once you've got that saddle sorted then, get it on the bike, and it's time to set it up and getting it in the right position. Bolt it on there, get it right, get it on there, and have a little ride. From that, you should be able to feel any little pressure points. Now let's just say you don't want any pressure points where there shouldn't be. If it's causing you discomfort at the front or the rear, men, women, it doesn't matter. It means the saddle angle is not set up quite correctly. Play around with the tilt on it, so raising or lowering the nose on it, just so that it sort of equals out. Do it in tiny increments, as it can make a really big difference. When you are sorting out the angle for that saddle, make sure you do it on some fairly level ground, ride around the car park, set it up that way, and with the seat up as well, because obviously that is exactly how you're going to be riding your bike. Once you've got that saddle tilt sorted then, and the angle of it bob on, write it down somewhere, because that way, anytime you replace the saddle or change the bike potentially, you know exactly at what angle that seat needs to be and at exactly what height, so you can always set it up the same. Next contact point I'm going to talk about, these little beauties, grips. Again, a personal choice for everybody, but a few things to think about here are thickness, depending on the size of your hands, big palms, little palms, you know, how far your hand will wrap around. That can affect how tightly you're going to grip on, so it can affect arm pump as well, so a little experiment is worth doing here. Also the density of them, sort of how soft and tacky they are, can depend on how much grip they give you, whether you wear gloves or don't wear gloves. I don't, so I like a nice sort of good tacky grip. These ones are nicely contoured to my hand, so they work a treat. Final contact point then is the pedals. Now, whether you're all about that flat pedal thunder or clipped in whip it, enduro racing is pretty hard on them. So you see these, they're a clipless pedal, they've got the device or the clipless sort of device in the middle there, and then this big old cage, this platform around them. That's one, so that when you're unclipped, you've got a good platform to sit on, or two, if you take a big rock strike, then the mechanism itself is protected. And you pair that up with a good shoe, something that's going to protect your foot as well. That's probably the way to go. If you're looking at flat pedals, a nice wide body, good platform to stand on, plenty of grip is the way forward. We covered contact points with the body then, but what about contact points with the ground? Yes, tyres. Now let's think about our tyres here, because, well, they should be hopefully the only thing touching the ground. So it's a pretty important decision to make here on what you run and how you have them set up. First up, let's talk casing there. There's a fine line between protection and strength over weight. But personally, I'd go more towards the weight end of things and having a nice, thick, chunky casing. That way you're going to protect yourself against any potential slits in the side, or they're going to be stronger under compression as well, and less just likely to tear or get holes on the top from any impacts or punctures like that. If you want to go for a lighter casing, then I'd recommend an insert. I mean, personally, I'd recommend inserts on enduro bikes all the time anyway, especially if you live somewhere really rough and rocky. Much like it is out here at Canazai in Italy, it is pretty wild. So an insert is almost a definite in the back of this. And actually, I do run the thicker enduro casing as well, just because, do you know what? That sacrifice of a few extra 100 grams is a small price to pay for not getting a punny out on the trail. Those tyres have got to be shod on something, so that brings me nicely onto wheels. Enduro wheels want to be tough and sturdy. You can either choose carbon or aluminium. I'd be a bit wary of carbon. If you like the feel of a nice stiff rear wheel, then they are the way to go if that's what you want. But obviously you've got to be careful of potentially damaging them. If you're racing, aluminium's a great way to go because you can fix them or bodge them out on the trail. A nice wide internal rim, so these are a 30mm internal, gives a really good tyre profile, really sort of, rather than being narrow, this opens it out and gives a good profile to the tyre for grip and things like that. And also the wider profile of the tyre and the rim helps to avoid any punctures as well. Personal choice on, like I said, what they're made up of, but probably for racing, aluminium's the way forward. Being self-sufficient is a key part to enduro racing and riding. So how you take those spares and extra bits and bobs with you, like food and water, is a real key thing to think about here. Now, I'm a bit of a minimalist, so I like to strap stuff using gear straps to my bike, and then anything I can't attach to the bike will go in my pockets. Gear straps, great way of carrying stuff on the bike. Neat, tidy, and secure. This stuff on here is definitely not going anywhere. A lot of modern new enduro bikes will have extra spaces, or lugs if you like, where you can screw in mounts to put gear on. So things like plates where you can attach your gear strap to, pumps, multi-tools, things like that. Just places to make things real neat and tidy and helpful for carrying gear around with you. The bare minimum you want to be looked to taking with you, well, a spare tube, a multi-tool with a chain breaker on it, and a pump. But if you want to know loads more about exactly what to pack for enduro racing and riding, well then check out the video linked below in the description for a full rundown, whether you want to go minimalist or take a backpack. Suspension time then, and another massive topic which we can't delve too deep into because we'd be here forever, but we do have some wicked videos, again linked below if you want to check them out, to really dive into suspension setup. But this is going to be more sort of what to look out for with a basic setup that you can then tweak and get going with, travel, front, rear, kind of what to look out for. Enduro bikes are typically around the 150 to 170 mil range, with super enduro bikes having a little bit more. Like my Giga here, this is 180 up front, 170 out back, rolling on 29ers. Bikes will often have a little bit more travel up front to take that initial impact, that initial hit, with a little bit less travel out the back. Outback air shocks are the most commonly found type of shock on enduro bikes because their tunability is vastly improved these days, as is their weight. They're lighter than a coil shock. But back in the day, these things really struggled with the heat and they'd end up turning into a pogo stick because they'd get so hot, which is where a coil would win over it basically. It would stay, a coil shock would stay the same at the beginning, at the end of the stroke if you like, and it wouldn't change because it could handle that heat buildup a lot better. Despite the consistency of coil shocks, I'd still say air is king though, and purely down to the tunability of them. I mean, on this shock, you've got a lockout lever, you've got high and low speed rebound, high and low speed compression, and you can put volume spacers in there so you can affect the air spring rate as well, so that the shock actually ramps up and gets further at the end of the shock by adding various bands in there. Just like the rear shock, the forks have also got tons of different adjustments these days. Generally always air, you know, you've got your high and low speed rebounds, compressions, and you can add volume spacers into these as well, so you can change that air spring rate. Now, not everyone is the same. Obviously, everyone's got different bikes, different riding styles. So when it comes to setting up your suspension, I'd go for around a 25 to 30% sag to get you going, and then give it a few rides. The more you ride the bike on the more varied terrain, the more you'll understand how your suspension works and how you want to adapt it and change it, maybe slow the rebound or quicken the rebound, and you'll learn about it. There's so much to know out there that actually you're never going to get it dialed on the first go. So it's the more tinkering, the better almost. I touched on the lockout earlier. Like I said, this one's got a little lever here. If you want to take that one step further, then you can actually get kits for various different shocks where you run a bar mounted lockout lever or even grip shift. So you don't even need to reach down and flip that thing. Definitely a lockout is a good idea. With big long liaisons, you can firm that shock up and it's going to make pedaling much easier. Something you certainly want on the bike, I'd recommend. Is bigger better? Well, if you think about it, bigger rotors and more pistons generally mean more power. But is that the way to go? I mean, when combined with the right brake pads as well, what's the best setup? What I'd recommend for a solid setup is a larger rotor out front, something like a 200, 203 mil. That's going to give you a big old leverage and a lot of braking power. Out back, maybe something slightly smaller, a 180. Now, the reason for this is you don't quite need the power out the back. Basically, you're going to be locking the rear wheel up a lot to flick the bike around and maneuver it about with that. You might go up to a larger disc out back if you're riding big long trails and those rotors and those pads and brakes are really heating up. A bigger rotor is going to help dissipate the heat quicker and more efficiently, especially if they're floating rotors. That way they don't expand and contract with the heat as much, they stay at a constant all the time. Brake pads are something you can also change and choose depending upon track locations and conditions as well. If you're in the big alpine sort of trails like we are here, then a metallic pad is going to cope a bit better. It's not going to heat up and sort of fade over time. It's going to remain consistent the whole way through its run. If you're running shorter sort of trails, little loops, and the brakes aren't getting that kind of heat and fatigue through them, then an organic pad might be better for you, something with a good bit of bite to it. You'll also notice on brake pads like these Shimano ones here, they've actually got fins on them as well, and that's to draw air into the brake and help keep things cool as well. Something that's really useful. Like I said, when you're doing these huge alpine runs that we are here, brake fade and brake heat can really play a big part. So anything that can be done to keep the brakes cool is worth doing. There you have it then, some of my setup tips and recommendations for how to set up your enduro bike. I hope you found them really useful, but do you know what, that's it from me. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I'm off out of here to get a spinning, happy riding, and I'll catch you next time.